Hi guys, welcome back to the home and homestead. Today we'll be doing some food preservation. We'll be doing some water bath canning, part 1 of a 4-part spring canning series. So I'll be using some fun and interesting flavor pairings with some of the more common spring harvest produce that you can find around the yard, in your garden, or at farmers markets. First, what we'll be doing is a rhubarb barbecue sauce. It is found in the Ball Blue Book as well as the Complete Ball Canning Cookbook. It is called Victoria or rhubarb sauce. What I'll be doing is an adaptation or modification of this recipe. The original recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of allspice, cinnamon, and ginger. I'll be doing more of savory spices, which I'll go over later when I'm completing the recipe. So when I'm doing water bath canning, and any canning project really, the first thing I do is I set up all of my canning supplies. So I'll have the jars that I'm planning to use all set up, and I have a stock pot going with water inside just to keep the jars warm and get them to a nice warm temperature, because the item I will be canning is hot and you want the jars to be of a similar temperature. I have a big Dutch oven that I cook in. We have a glass stove top, which you can use a water bath canner on if they're a flat bottom canning vessel. However, I like to use a separate electric burner, and I use this with my water bath canner. And I have a laser which works well to check the temperature of the water. And then I like to have my canning ladle. This works very well for getting the jams or whatever you happen to be canning out of the corners of the Dutch oven, and it pours very nicely into the jars. Your measuring cups and spoons. Later I'll be doing some jam, so I have pectin out, canning salt, granulated sugar, and this is the brown sugar measured out for today's recipe. Then I have some drying towel and drying pad for when the jars are being filled, and once they're finished canning, then they can cool and dry off in this area here. I have a couple of jar lifters so I can transfer the jars to the water bath canner. And here is the headspace measuring device. On the other end, you can use this as a bubble removing tool. And this is a magnetic lid lifter tool. So here we have the ingredients ready for our rhubarb barbecue sauce. And I will be using an immersion blender, and I'll show that later. And that'll help puree the sauce so it's a nice smooth barbecue sauce. So let's get everything cooking and into the Dutch oven on the stove. All right, so let's get, calls for two quarts of chopped rhubarb for the single batch. Let's get the burner on. I like using this. It's a Pyrex. It's an 8-cup measuring bowl, and it has a pour spout. I use this quite a bit for canning. It's easy to prep the fruit or vegetable and then get it into the Dutch oven or pot for cooking. And a 1/2 cup of chopped onion. One and a 1/2 cups of raisins. They say to chop the raisins, but since I'll be using an immersion blender later, I'm just going to put them in whole, and as they soften and cook, the immersion blender will help and chop them up real nice. Okay, so 1 1/2 cups. There's 1 cup. I like these measuring cups as well. Not only are they stainless steel and they really hold up well, but inside of the cups they have the little lines marking the measurement, so you can use your 1 cup measuring cup and have a nice line to know, you know, where the half is. I mean, eyeballing it works fine, but if you're not as confident with your eyeballing, it's a good option. And the set comes with a 2-cup measuring cup, which is really handy when you're doing bread making and larger projects. Next we'll add a half a cup of vinegar. You can use white vinegar or apple cider vinegar, whichever is your preference. I'm going to use the apple cider vinegar. The important thing is just to make sure that the acidity is 5%, and this apple cider vinegar is a 5% acidity. And then 3½ cups of brown sugar. So we add all of these ingredients together, and we'll cook it down. And bring it to a boil. Then once we do so, then we'll bring it to a simmer, and then we'll add the spices that I mentioned earlier. So a lot of times with rhubarb recipes, you'll see there'll be maybe a strawberry rhubarb jam or a strawberry rhubarb tart. It's usually more on the sweet side. And so we really like barbecue sauce, and I saw this recipe and I thought this would be a great opportunity to make more of a savory rhubarb and hopefully a sauce that we enjoy. So we'll cook this down. Once we're ready to add the spices, I'll tell you what I decided to add for this recipe adaptation. Okay, so it's starting to kind of boil here. As you can see, the rhubarb is losing some of its moisture, and that's giving a nice amount of fluid to this recipe here. Alright, so this has come to a boil. I reduced the heat to a simmer. Now I'll be adding the savory spices that I'm going with. So this is 1 teaspoon of mustard powder, 1 teaspoon of paprika, 1 teaspoon of chipotle powder, and 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper. As I mentioned before, this recipe is in the Ball Blue Book, as well as the complete home preserving Ball cookbook. I can link both of those below. Traditionally, this recipe has more of the sweet spices of allspice, cinnamon, and ginger. If you wanted to do the traditional recipe, that would be a nice thing to try as well. Alright, so we'll bring this to a simmer. We want it to thicken up a little bit, and we'll be cooking for about 5 minutes. So let me set a timer here. We'll just keep stirring from time to time to help prevent any sticking or scorching or anything like that. This silicone spoon that I'm using is one of Rachel Ray's Lazy Tools. I like it because it can rest on the side of the pan that I'm using and cooking with. So this is an 8½ quart Calphalon nonstick Dutch oven. This works very well for canning. I can do large batches in this, so I can link this down below as well if you're looking to upgrade or start your canning process. Alright, so that's been about 5 minutes. So let me get the immersion blender going here. Alright, so that has it nice and smooth and blended down in a sauce consistency. Alright, next step, we'll be getting these into the jars. We have the jars off to the side here in the stock pot, like I was showing earlier. So I just dump the water out, and then I use my little canning ladle here. I can rest on the side and use a little funnel and place into jars. We're going to leave a 1/2 inch head space. So these are pint jars that I'm filling right now. I think I'll do 4 pint jars, and then I'll do some 4 ounce or 1/4 pint. This is a nice size for giving as gifts and perhaps in a little gift basket for somebody. Probably get a couple more out of this. Okay, let's see how I did with the headspace measuring here. So this is the headspace measuring tool. These little ones and these two could use a little bit more. It's important to get the headspace as close as you can, allowing the food to stay shelf stable for a longer period of time if you have the proper headspace. It's pretty good. It's a mild flavored barbecue type sauce. It has a sweetness from the rhubarb and from the raisins. If you like it a little spicier, I would probably add maybe a smoked paprika and a little more of the chipotle powder, but I think this will be good for just a nice, mild, sweet and tangy barbecue sauce. All right, so now we'll wipe down the rims. You want to catch any sticky sauce if there's any on the rim. I just use usually water and a paper towel if it's kind of a sticky item. Some people like to use white vinegar. So you place the lid on the jar and just finger tighten the jar. The rings are just to basically hold the lid in place while you're processing the jars. And then once they've been sealed and they sit for 12 to 24 hours, then I take the rings off when I store them in the pantry. All right, let's get these in the water bath canner. All right, the water bath canner has a nice simmer going, and I tested the temperature with my laser thermometer as well. And I just lower the jars into the water bath canner. Once they're all in there, the water will cover all the jars. So when you're filling the water bath canner with the water, leave a little room, because once you place jars in there, they will displace that water. Okay, we'll cover. And we'll let this boil and process for 15 minutes. Now that is what my elevation and where I live, that's what my canning recommendation is. If you live in a different elevation, check what in the canning cookbook they will say at what elevation you live at, what your processing time should be. So let this process for 15 minutes. Here I have in the Ball Blue Book, it shows the altitude chart like I was saying. So based on where you are living and what your altitude is in feet, it tells you what your processing time should be in boil water or water bath canning, as well as in pressure canning. Okay, so the processing time is up. So let's remove the lid, and we'll let this just cool down for about 5 minutes, and then I'll transfer these jars over to the drying area. These jars will sit here in this cooling area for 12 to 24 hours. And then at that time, I will label them, remove the rings, and put them in the pantry. So what I'll do tomorrow, once these have cooled and sealed, hopefully we'll hear a ping or two as they're sitting here. Labels, and I'll put them on there. There was one just pinging. And then for the larger ones that I'll keep in the pantry, I'll either put a label on top or just write with a Sharpie what it is and date it. And these will go down in our canning pantry. The ideal temperature is 50 to 70 degrees. We'll have some unique style of barbecue sauce to try for some of our dinners. I think this might pair well with our full rack of ribs that we do in the Instant Pot. We add a little bit of apple cider vinegar to the cooking water, and this might pair really well with that then too. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video today and water bath canning the rhubarb barbecue sauce. Keep watching, and I'll have a few more videos on spring harvest canning projects. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. See you next time. Take care.